Welcome to the Poseidon Finance channel. Do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button. Let's get started. 5.7 million homes, that's the gap. 5.7 million single-family houses that should have come back onto the resale market over the last 5 years that simply haven't. They're not unbuilt. They exist. People live in them. The owners are in their 70s and 80s, and they are not moving. I want to start there because every conversation about housing affordability in this country starts in the wrong place. It starts with builders. It starts with zoning. It starts with the Federal Reserve. Those things matter. I'm not pretending they don't matter. But they're downstream of something else, and the something else is the whole point of this lecture, which is, why is the largest cohort of asset holders in American history, sitting on the largest single category of household wealth ever assembled by any generation in any country, refusing to sell? Okay, let me back up. Before you can have that conversation, you need to understand what was supposed to happen. Around 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, every major demographic research outfit, the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard, the AARP, the Urban Institute, even the Internal Census Bureau team, they all ran the same projection. Boomers would age out of their houses starting around 2020. Empty nesters become downsizers. Downsizers become condo dwellers. Condo dwellers move into assisted living. And as they did this, they would, in aggregate, release something on the order of, well, the estimates varied. The consensus number was somewhere between 4 and 7 million single-family homes back into the resale market over the course of the 2020s. This was called, by people who like ominous branding, the silver tsunami. The idea being there would be this enormous wave of housing supply hitting the market just as millennials reached peak family formation years. The two demographic curves would meet. Supply from boomers, demand from millennials. And the affordability crisis would resolve itself through pure population dynamics. No policy required. Right. So, none of it happened. The silver tsunami didn't arrive. It hasn't arrived. And here's the strange part. Or actually, it's not strange. It should have been obvious. It's not going to arrive. Not on the timeline anyone predicted. Probably not at all in the form anyone predicted. A few numbers, and then we'll move on. Redfin published an analysis, I think it was last spring, might have been the spring before, showing that empty nest boomers own roughly twice as many large homes, 3 bedrooms or more, as millennial families with children currently living at home. Think about that for a second. The cohort that needs the space doesn't have it. The cohort that doesn't need the space won't release it. The median age of the American homeowner, which sat around 50 in 2005, is now north of 58. That's not aging in place. That's something more interesting than aging in place. Average tenure in a home, by the way. When I was a graduate student, the textbook number was 7 years. Buy a house, live in it for about 7 years, sell it, move up. That was the assumed model. The current number is over 13 years and climbing. It has roughly doubled in a single generation. Now, I'm going to argue something in this lecture that I would probably... Look, I'd be careful saying this at a conference. I might say it in the right room. But the argument is this. The boomer refusal to sell is not a quirk of psychology. It's not nostalgia for the house where you raised your kids. It's not stubbornness. It is a rational economic response to a tax and regulatory architecture that we, and by we, I mean Congress, working mostly in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, built specifically to incentivize exactly this behavior. We engineered the silver tsunami out of existence before it ever started. The legislators just didn't realize what they were doing. Most of them are dead now. And the consequences of that, which we'll get to in the back half, these are not just about housing. They reshape household formation. They reshape geographic mobility, which has collapsed in this country to levels not seen since the Civil War by some measures. They reshape the cost basis of an entire generation's net worth. They reshape who gets to be middle class. Some of you in this room are going to graduate and go work at firms that have figured this out. The smart capital figured it out probably 5-6 years ago. The build-to-rent funds, the single-family rental aggregators, the wealth management practices that specialize in what they call legacy real estate strategy. These people understand exactly what I'm about to walk you through. And they understand it because they've made it their business to understand it. The public conversation about housing, the one you read about in the Times, it's still operating on a model from 2008. It's wrong. By the end of today, you'll know why. Here's what you'll have by the end of this hour. 3 things you didn't have walking in. 1, the specific legislative architecture that made the silver tsunami impossible. 2, the cascade of incentives that makes selling an actively irrational decision for a boomer homeowner sitting in his living room right now. And 3, the second order effects that almost nobody is pricing correctly into their model of where housing goes from here. That third one is the one I'd build a career on if I were sitting where you are. So, let me start with the part everyone gets wrong. The conventional model. Let me walk you through what you were taught, because almost certainly you were taught something like this in an undergraduate real estate course or a personal finance class, or you just absorbed it from the culture. The story goes like this. A young family buys a starter home in their 30s, 3 bedrooms, modest, maybe a fixer-upper. As their income grows and their family grows, they trade up. They sell the starter and buy something larger. This is the move-up market. Then, in their 50s or 60s, the kids leave for college, and the parents, who now have a 4 or 5 bedroom house and 2 empty nesters rattling around in it, they downsize. They sell the family home, capture the equity, buy a townhouse or a condo, or maybe move to Florida or Arizona. Eventually they enter assisted living. Eventually they die. And the family home gets sold. New family moves in. The cycle continues. This was the model. It's the model that underwrites pretty much every projection of housing supply done by anyone with a public-facing job. And it was more or less accurate for the post-war generation, people born between roughly 1925 and 1945, the cohort that bought their houses in the 50s and 60s. They actually did downsize. They actually did sell the family home in their 60s or 70s. The census data on this is quite clean. You see a clear bump in sales by homeowners in that age band, peaking around 1995, 2000, then collapsing. So here's where the puzzle starts to surface. Boomers, and let me be specific about who I mean, born 1946 to 1964, so the oldest are now in their late 70s, the youngest in their early 60s. They are not behaving like their parents at all. The Joint Center for Housing Studies tracks something called the mobility rate, which is just the percentage of homeowners in a given age band who sold and moved in a given year. For homeowners aged 65 to 74, that rate was around 4% in the late 90s. It is now under 2%. It is halved. And for the 75 plus group, where you'd actually expect the highest move rate because of health-driven moves into senior living, it's collapsed by about the same proportion. So the people who are supposed to be selling are not selling. I'll tell you something I found puzzling about this for a long time. When I was first pulling this data, this would have been around 2017, 2018, I was getting ready to teach a section on housing markets. And I pulled the move rates by age cohort. My first thought was, this is just the financial crisis. People who got hammered in 2008, 2009, their home equity disappeared. They're stuck because they can't move. That seemed like a clean story. It is not the story. And I want you to take this on board because it shapes everything that follows. The collapse in older homeowner mobility predates the financial crisis. It started showing up clearly around 2002, 2003, long before anyone was talking about subprime. And it has continued through every market environment since. Bull markets, bear markets, low rates, high rates, doesn't matter. The decline in older homeowner mobility is a 25-year trend at this point, not a crisis response, which means whatever's driving it is not cyclical, it's architectural. Dowell Myers at USC, he's one of the few demographers who's been honest about this. He co-authored a piece, I think it was 2017, called something like Aging in Place or The Great Senior Short Sale, I can't remember the exact title. And he argued, and I'm paraphrasing, the gist was that the senior cohort was holding more housing per capita than any senior cohort in American history, by a lot. By something like a factor of 2 compared to the same age band in 1980. Myers was treated as kind of a Cassandra. People didn't want to hear it. Because if Myers was right, then the projected supply that everyone was pricing into their affordability models wasn't coming. And that's a deeply inconvenient conclusion for everyone in the housing policy world. Now, here is the reason this is hard for the conventional model to absorb. The conventional model assumes housing decisions are made by individuals optimizing for individual welfare. You age. You want less house. You sell, you buy a smaller place, welfare improves. That is not what is happening. Boomer homeowners are not making individual welfare maximizing decisions about housing. They are making household-level wealth preservation decisions that incorporate tax planning, estate planning, healthcare contingency planning, and intergenerational wealth transfer optimization. The house is no longer a place to live. It is an instrument, a specific kind of tax-advantaged, estate-optimized, government-subsidized financial instrument that happens to also have a roof and a kitchen. And once you see it that way, once you start treating the primary residence as a financial product rather than a shelter, the behavior makes complete sense. The same way it makes sense that nobody voluntarily liquidates a Roth 1RA, or pulls money out of a 401k before retirement age, or sells a position in an asset whose cost basis is about to step up to fair market value. There's an analogy I sometimes use here, and forgive me because it's a stretch, but I think it gets at something true. Think about what happens in evolutionary biology when an organism arrives at an island with no predators, the Galapagos finches, the dodo. You get this thing called insular endemism, where the organism adapts to a very specific local environment and gradually loses the capacity to function in any other environment. The boomer homeowner is the dodo. The house has become an island. The tax code is the absence of predators. There is no evolutionary pressure to move, and gradually, over decades, the capacity to move, financially, structurally, emotionally, has atrophied to the point where it would now require a catastrophe to dislodge them. That's the picture I want you to hold in your head, not stubbornness, not nostalgia. an organism perfectly adapted to a specific environment that we collectively built around them, and that incidentally makes it impossible for anyone else to use the same patch of land. Okay, let me actually show you how we built that environment. That's where we go next. To understand why your parents won't sell their house, you have to go back to 1978, California. Howard Jarvis. Proposition 13. Now, Proposition 13 is one of those pieces of legislation that everyone has heard of, very few people understand the actual mechanics of, and almost nobody understands the second and third order consequences of. So we're going to spend a minute on it. In the mid-70s, property values in California were rising fast, faster than household incomes, and property taxes, which were assessed annually at market value, were rising in lockstep. Retired Californians on fixed incomes were getting tax bills they couldn't pay. There were stories, and they were real stories, not invented, of widows being foreclosed by the county for tax delinquency on houses they'd lived in for 40 years. Howard Jarvis ran a populist campaign. The proposition passed, about a 2/3 majority. What Proposition 13 did, mechanically, was cap the assessed value of a property at its 1975 valuation, plus a maximum 2% annual increase, and only allowed a reassessment to current market value when the property changed hands. Transferred, sold, inherited, under most circumstances. Okay, so far, so reasonable. The intended purpose was to protect long-time homeowners, retirees especially, from being taxed out of their homes. Fine, that was the explicit goal. The unintended consequence, and this is the consequence we are still living with almost 50 years later, was the creation of an enormous tax wedge between long-term owners and new buyers. A house in, let's say, Palo Alto that was bought in 1980 for $200,000 is currently worth maybe $3.5 million. The longtime owner is paying property tax on something like, well, after the maximum 2% annual increase compounded over 45 years, maybe $4,000 a year. The same house, if sold today, the new owner would pay property tax on $3.5 million, so roughly $40,000 a year, 10 times more. What does that do? It locks the original owner in. Selling and moving, even moving across the street, means a tax bill that is an order of magnitude larger. So they don't move. And this is where the history actually matters. California was the prototype. Florida passed Save Our Homes in 1992. Same basic structure, Oregon, Texas, Massachusetts, to varying degrees. About a dozen states have some version of this. The exact mechanics differ. The structural effect is identical. Long-term homeowners pay dramatically less in property tax than new buyers of comparable properties. Move, and you eat the difference. Right. So, Proposition 13 is structural lock-in mechanism number 1. Hold that. We'll come back to it. Now jump to 1986, Tax Reform Act of 1986, Reagan era. This is a sprawling piece of legislation, but the part that matters for us is this. Prior to 1986, real estate owners could use depreciation losses on rental properties to offset ordinary income, almost without limit. The 86 reform eliminated that. It separated passive losses from active income, killed a huge class of tax shelters overnight. That's why you see all those real estate fortunes that were unwound in the late 80s and early 90s. The Trumps of the world, real estate-driven wealth, they got hit hard. Real story for another day. But the part of the 86 Act that you really need to know about, that nobody talks about because it's not very dramatic, is this. Under the pre-86 regime, when you sold a personal residence, you could roll the gain into a new residence of equal or greater value. Section 1034, rollover. The implicit assumption was that home ownership was a continuous capital position, and you should only owe tax when you actually exited the position. You bought a starter home, sold it, rolled the gain into a bigger home, sold that, rolled into the next one. The tax obligation accumulated but deferred. The deferred gains, if you held the property until death, wiped out. Step-up basis. Heirs inherit at fair market value. If you eventually sold the last property without buying another, you owed the cumulative gain, but there was a one-time lifetime exclusion of $125,000 for people over 55. Section 121, the original version. Okay, so the structure was accumulate gains through your housing career, defer through rollovers, and either die in your last house and pass it tax-free to heirs, or take the small one-time exclusion at the end. Now, 1997, Bill Clinton signs the Taxpayer Relief Act, and the housing provisions of that act, which nobody really paid attention to at the time because they were lost in a much bigger conversation about capital gains rate cuts. They restructure the entire framework. Section 121 gets rewritten, the rollover requirement gone, the age 55 requirement gone, the lifetime cap gone, replaced with a $250,000 exclusion for individuals, $500,000 for married couples, available every 2 years on any sale of a primary residence held for 2 of the last 5 years. In 1997, the median home price in the United States was about $130,000. The average gain on a primary residence sale was nowhere near $500,000 for most Americans. The new exclusion seemed enormously generous. It looked like a giveaway to homeowners, and in 1997, it was. The provision was not indexed to inflation. It has not been updated since 1997. The median home price is now over $400,000, by some measures closer to $450,000. In high-cost coastal markets, and this is where most boomer wealth is concentrated, on the coasts and in certain Sunbelt metros, the median sale price is well over $1 million. A boomer who bought a house in San Diego for $150,000 in 1985, who's now sitting on a property worth $1.4 million, has well over $1 million in accumulated capital gains. The exclusion covers $500,000 of that if they're married, less if they're single or widowed. The remaining $750,000 federal long-term capital gains, plus net investment income tax, plus state, depending on the state, they're looking at a bill north of $200,000. Just for selling. If they don't sell, if they hold the house and die in it, that entire gain is wiped out completely. Step-up basis. The heirs inherit at $1.4 million cost basis, zero tax. So, the Tax Reform Act of '86 and the Taxpayer Relief Act of '97 combined created a structure where, for a substantial chunk of boomer homeowners, particularly those in expensive markets, who are exactly the homeowners holding the largest houses, the rational decision is to not sell, ever. Hold the house until death, pass the appreciated asset to heirs with stepped-up basis, capture a massive intergenerational tax-free wealth transfer. This is not an unintended consequence of the '97 law. It was foreseeable. It was foreseen by some. There are committee testimony documents from 1996, I've actually read these, where tax policy researchers warned that the provision would create perverse incentives over time as housing appreciation outpaced the unindexed cap. They were ignored. The provision passed. Almost 30 years later, we are living inside that incentive structure, and we will continue to live inside it until either Congress acts, which Congress will not, or until the boomer cohort, as an actuarial matter, ages out of the market. That's the history. 2 laws, written 19 years apart, sitting in the tax code, creating the largest intergenerational housing supply distortion in American history, mostly invisible, because the people who wrote it are dead, and the people who benefit from it have no incentive to talk about it. Now we get to the part everyone has heard about, the lock-in, rate lock-in. You've read about it, you've heard the term. I want to walk you through the actual mechanics because most of what's been written about it is incomplete. Here's where we are. As of the most recent Federal Housing Finance Agency data, somewhere around 70 to 75% of all outstanding mortgages in this country carry an interest rate below 5%. Around 40% are below 4%, and about 25% are below 3%. The current prevailing rate on a 30-year fixed, as we sit here, is hovering around 7%. Has been for a while. Most American boomer homeowners either have no mortgage at all, they paid it off, or they're carrying a sub 4% mortgage they refinanced into during 2020 or 2021. That pandemic refinancing wave, the biggest refi wave in American history, by the way, by orders of magnitude. About 14 million households refinanced in 2020 and 2021 alone, most of them into rates between 2.5% and 3.5%. They locked it in. Okay, so here's the math problem. Let me make it concrete. Take a boomer couple, suburban Atlanta, paid off their house in 2015. House is worth $600,000, no mortgage. They want to downsize. They sell, walk away with, set aside taxes for a minute, $600,000. They want to buy a townhouse for $400,000. So far, so good. They have $200,000 left over after the move, but the townhouse costs them, even setting aside the financing question, property taxes that, depending on the state, get assessed at market value on the new property, so substantially higher than what they were paying, plus HOA fees on the townhouse, which can run $1,000 a month in many markets, plus the costs of the move itself, which for an older couple, downsizing out of 40 years of accumulated stuff is 6 months of stress, $25,000 in moving costs, lost time, potential health impacts, family disruption. And what do they actually gain? They free up $200,000 in cash, which, invested in a treasury at current rates, generates maybe $9,000 a year, pre-tax. The downsizing math, just on cash flow, does not work for them. The downsizing math, in fact, makes them worse off in monthly cash terms unless they're already extremely wealthy, in which case, why are they downsizing for financial reasons? Now, layer in the mortgage holder version of the same case. Same couple, but instead of being mortgage-free, they have a $200,000 balance at a 2.8% rate they refinanced into in 2021. Their current monthly principal and interest on that 2.8% mortgage, call it $820. Property taxes locked in at long-term owner rates in many states, especially if they're in a Proposition 13 or Save Our Homes regime. Insurance, moderate. Total monthly housing cost, around $1,400, say. They want to sell and buy a $400,000 townhouse. Assume they put $200,000 down. Take a $200,000 mortgage at 7%. Monthly principal and interest, about $1,300. property taxes reassessed at current market value, doubles or triples depending on state. HOA fees on the new place. They are now looking at a total housing cost north of $2,500 a month. Their housing cost has just gone up by about $1,100 a month, or about $13,000 a year, in exchange for less house and the dubious psychological benefit of having moved. What's the internal rate of return on that decision? It's deeply negative, catastrophically negative. This is the lock-in, and it's not soft. It's a hard mathematical lock that compounds with everything else, right? So that's the cash flow side. Let me give you the layer underneath that, which is the tax side. The same couple, if they sell, faces capital gains. Even if they're under the $500,000 exclusion, they're looking at transaction costs of 6% in realtor commissions, plus closing costs, plus the implicit cost of finding a new place in a market with almost no inventory. Because, and here's the recursion, everyone else is also not selling for the same reasons. Inventory is at multi-decade lows in most metros. So even if you wanted to move, finding the place to move to is itself expensive and time-consuming. Let me give you an actual example. A colleague of mine, another department, his parents tried to downsize 3 years ago. They had a 5-bedroom in Connecticut, kids long gone, wanted something smaller and closer to their grandchildren. They listed the house, sold within a week, no problem, way over asking. Then they spent, I am not exaggerating, 14 months looking for a place to buy. Bid on 11 properties, got beat out on every single one, cash buyers mostly. Other boomers who were also relocating to be near grandchildren and had liquidated similar properties elsewhere and were sitting on cash with no financing contingencies. After 14 months of failed bids, my colleague's parents gave up, rented, ended up about $100,000 worse off from the rent burn, plus the lost equity appreciation on the house they'd sold, which had continued to appreciate while they were homeless. They told me afterwards, and this is the line that stuck with me, they said they'd never sell another house again. They were done. The market punished them for trying to move. These are not unsophisticated people. The father was an actuary. He understood the math. He still got burned. So the surface mechanism is this: rate lock plus property tax, lock plus transaction friction, plus inventory scarcity, all reinforcing each other in a feedback loop. None of these factors alone would necessarily prevent a sale. Together, they make selling a manifestly irrational financial decision for the marginal boomer homeowner. And the policy responses to this, there have been a few, they all address one variable in isolation. Various states have proposed property tax portability provisions. California has a limited one, Proposition 19, that lets you transfer your assessed value to a new house if it's of equal or lesser value, with conditions. Texas has talked about something similar. These help at the margin. They do not break the lock, because rate lock alone is sufficient to deter most moves in the current environment. And even if rates fell to 4%, which is what most economists assume is the long-run normal, the move math still doesn't work for most older homeowners because the tax side and the inventory side dominate. This is the surface mechanism. It is the mechanism that gets discussed in the trade press, that shows up in CNBC segments. It is real. It explains a significant part of what we're seeing, but it is not the whole picture. There is a layer below this, and that's where the actual strategic optimization is happening, where the wealth managers and the estate planners and the family offices are running their playbooks. That's where we go next. Step-up basis at death. Internal Revenue Code section 1014. I want you to memorize that. Section 1014. Because if you understand nothing else from this lecture, understand this. Section 1014 of the Internal Revenue Code is the most powerful tax avoidance mechanism in American law. It is more powerful than the Roth IRA, more powerful than the 401k, more powerful than the qualified small business stock exclusion, more powerful than any other single provision of the code because it operates without any contribution limit, without any holding period beyond death itself, and without any income or wealth threshold. Here's what it says. When a person dies, the cost basis of every capital asset they own, for our purposes, their house, resets to the fair market value as of the date of death. Resets, not partially, not pro rata, completely. All the accumulated capital gains, however many decades they've accrued, however large they've grown, wiped to zero. The heirs inherit the asset at the new stepped-up basis. If they sell the house the next day for the same fair market value, they owe zero capital gains tax. The unrealized gain that the deceased was sitting on, federal government has no claim on it, never had a claim on it, never will. This is the engine. Everything else we've talked about, the rate lock, the Proposition 13 lock-in, the Section 121 inadequacy, all of it, those are reinforcing factors. The engine is step-up basis. Step-up basis is what makes dying in your house the financially optimal exit strategy. And once you understand that, the boomer non-sale pattern reveals itself as a coherent, rational, optimized estate plan being executed at population scale. Okay, let me show you how this works at the level of an individual household. Then I want to walk you through what the estate planning industry has built on top of it. Boomer couple. bought a house in coastal California in 1982 for $200,000. House is now worth, let's say $2.5 million. So we're talking about $2.3 million in unrealized gains. If they sell tomorrow, after the $500,000 exclusion, they owe long-term capital gains on $1.8 million. Federal rate, including net investment income tax, about 24%. State rate, California, top bracket, about 13%. They are looking at roughly $670,000 in tax, just for selling. If they hold the house and both eventually die, let's say the husband dies first, the wife inherits at stepped-up basis, then the wife dies 5 years later and the kids inherit at twice stepped-up basis. The entire $2.3 million in gains, plus whatever further appreciation occurred during those 5 years, transfers tax-free to the next generation. Net difference between the two strategies, well north of $700,000, possibly closer to $1 million, depending on continued appreciation, for one house, for one household decision. Now scale that up. There are something like 70 million boomers in this country. Even if only a fraction of them are in the high appreciation cohort, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in unrealized capital gains held in primary residences that are being deliberately, rationally, strategically held until death to capture the step-up. Some estimates I've seen, and these are not crazy estimates, these are coming out of places like the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, put the total unrealized capital gains in boomer-owned primary residences at somewhere between $4 and $6 trillion. Trillion, with a T. So that's the engine. Now let me show you what's been built on top of it. If you're a boomer with a paid-off house worth several $1 million, and you'd like to access some of that wealth without triggering capital gains, what are your options? You have 3. Option 1, home equity line of credit, borrow against the house, interest deductible up to limits, depending on use. You spend the borrowed money on whatever you like. When you die, the heirs inherit the house at stepped-up basis, sell it, pay off the line of credit, keep the rest. You've converted unrealized appreciation into spendable cash without ever triggering a taxable event. Option 2, reverse mortgage, the home equity conversion mortgage, federally insured. You borrow against the house, the loan compounds at interest, you make no payments while alive, and when you die or move out, the house is sold and the loan repaid. The estate gets whatever's left. Mechanically, this is a way to convert a primary residence into a tax-free retirement income stream. The reverse mortgage industry, which was a sleepy little corner of finance for decades, has been growing. Let me put it this way. The number of these originations in the last 5 years has grown faster than the senior population, which tells you everything. Option 3, sale leaseback structures. You sell the house to an institutional buyer. There are firms now that specialize in this, and you lease it back. You walk away with the cash, you continue to live in the house, you pay rent. The institutional buyer is taking a long position on the house's continued appreciation plus rental yield. You're taking a short position on your own remaining life expectancy. These are not exotic strategies. These are mainstream. Your local wealth manager, assuming your local wealth manager is any good, has all 3 of these in his toolkit and is recommending them to his boomer clients right now, today, for clients who have substantial unrealized real estate gains. The optimization is so clean that it's become a category of practice. Legacy real estate planning. There are conferences, there are designations. There is a whole continuing education infrastructure built around this single tax interaction. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. Actually, no, let me put it as a question first. What's the macroeconomic effect of this? What happens when you have a generation collectively running this optimization at scale? 2 things happen, and these are the things almost no one is pricing into their model. First, and this is the one I find genuinely surprising, the housing stock itself becomes illiquid in a structural way that has no historical precedent. We have built, accidentally, a private real estate vehicle that holds 2/3 of all single-family housing in the United States, and that vehicle has a single redemption mechanism, which is generational mortality. You cannot redeem early without massive penalty. The vehicle holds for, on average, the remaining life expectancy of an aging cohort, which at current ages is somewhere between 15 and 25 years. Try to imagine an institutional asset manager running a fund with those redemption terms. They'd be sued, they'd be shut down. We've created exactly that fund at the household level and called it the American Dream. Second, and this is the part that should genuinely concern you, especially if you're under 40, the wealth transfer that occurs when this vehicle finally does redeem, when this generation does pass, is going to be the largest in human history. Cerulli Associates and others have put numbers on it, somewhere between $70 and $100 trillion over the next 20 years, most of it concentrated in real estate, most of it flowing to a narrow cohort of heirs, geographically concentrated. The wealth concentration effect of this is going to be staggering, because the people inheriting boomer real estate are mostly Gen X and millennial children of homeowners, which is a subset of those generations. The people who don't have homeowner parents, and that's a substantial chunk of the population, particularly minorities, particularly people whose parents rented, they get nothing. So we have engineered, through the interaction of Section 1014, Section 121, Proposition 13 and its clones, and the rate lock-in from the recent refinancing wave, we have engineered an intergenerational wealth transfer of unprecedented scale that, on its way to occurring, is going to keep housing supply locked out of the market for another 15 to 25 years, and that, when it occurs, will dramatically widen the wealth gap between those whose parents owned and those whose parents did not. This is not an accident in any single piece. Each piece was designed in isolation to solve a specific local problem. The aggregate effect was not designed by anyone. It emerges from the interaction of provisions written across 5 decades by people who, in most cases, weren't aware of what the other provisions were doing. That's the hidden wiring. The boomers aren't refusing to sell out of stubbornness. They're holding because the entire structure of American tax law tells them, with extraordinary mathematical clarity, that holding is the right thing to do. And it is, for them. What it does to the rest of the system, that's a different conversation. We'll save it for next time.